When I was 17, I collapsed in the school gym. The diagnosis was serious: surgery, long recovery, maybe lifelong medication. My parents told me not to worry, that we had a hospital savings account set aside for emergencies. It was supposed to be my lifeline. Except it wasn't. One night, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. They drained every cent of it, not for my treatment, but to send my brother overseas for a brighter future. My pain was negotiable, his dreams weren't. They told me I was strong enough to endure, while he deserved opportunity. I lay in bed that night, stitches burning in my side, realizing I had been sacrificed so he could board a plane. That betrayal carved something deep inside me. I swore if they wouldn't give me care, I'd learn to give it to myself. Years later, when they had no doctor to call, they found me, the one they had abandoned, holding the scalpel. My name is Adrian Malik. I'm 29 now, a doctor, but this story begins when I was 17, standing on a basketball court with sweat slick on my palms and fire burning in my chest. It wasn't just exhaustion. My heart stuttered, my vision blurred, and before I could even call out, the floor came up fast. I woke under fluorescent lights, the bitter sting of antiseptic in my nose, and an oxygen mask over my face. The ER doctor explained it cleanly, like he'd said the words 1,000 times: congenital heart defect, worsening under strain. Surgery was inevitable. Medication and monitoring weren't optional. It was the kind of condition you either treated, or you let it consume you. My parents sat at the foot of the bed, faces arranged into stiff masks of concern. My mother smoothed my hair back and said, "Don't worry, Adrian. That's why we have the hospital savings account. You'll be fine." I wanted to believe her. For years, they'd spoken about that account like it was my safety net. Every time relatives sent money, every time I earned a little tutoring cash, they told me it was going into the hospital fund. My lifeline, they called it. Except it wasn't. 3 nights later, back at home, I woke up thirsty at 2 a.m. I patted down the hallway for water, and froze when I heard voices in the kitchen. My parents, whispering. My dad's tone was sharp, anxious. "It's gone. Every cent. We used it to pay for Imran's tuition deposit and the flights. There's nothing left." My mom hushed him. "Don't say it like that. We invested in his future. Adrian's strong. He'll cope. Imran only gets this chance once." The words landed like a blade. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, heart pounding with more than illness. They had emptied my lifeline, not to save me, but to ship my brother overseas for university. The next morning, they smiled at me like nothing had changed. They talked about my upcoming routine appointments like the money was waiting, like my surgery wasn't already slipping out of reach. I swallowed my anger, nodded, played the part of the dutiful son. But inside, something broke. Something cold settled in its place. If my family wasn't going to save me, I would save myself. And one day, they'd see exactly what I became without their help. The morning after I overheard them, my brother Imran was in the living room, suitcase open, new passport gleaming on the coffee table. My parents circled him like satellites, fussing over packing lists and travel adapters. I stood in the doorway, chest still aching from my last episode, watching them beam as if he were some kind of crown prince. When Mom finally noticed me, she said, "Adrian, come sit. We need to talk." Her tone was soft, rehearsed, like a teacher breaking bad news to a child. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're strong," he said flatly. "Always have been. Imran. He needs this opportunity. Overseas education. Better future. Better prospects. If we didn't use the savings, he'd never get this chance." "And me?" My voice came out quieter than I meant. "The surgery? The medicine?" Mom reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm, patronizing. "You can endure. You've always endured. Doctors exaggerate these things to make money. We'll find another way for your treatment later. But Imran's window is now. We couldn't let it close." I pulled my hand back, but they didn't notice, or they pretended not to. Imran smirked, zipping his bag. "Don't be dramatic, Adrian. You'll be fine. You always are." Fine. That was the word they used like it was fact. Fine when I passed out in the gym. Fine when I woke in the ER. Fine when my chest clenched so tight at night I thought my ribs would crack. Fine enough to be sacrificed. That week, the house was a celebration. Friends and relatives came over with gifts, envelopes of cash, hugs for Imran. They toasted his bright journey. No one mentioned me, except in passing, when an aunt clucked her tongue and said, "Don't worry, Adrian. You're tough. You'll manage." By the time Imran's flight left, I was invisible. At the airport, Mom wept into his shoulder, Dad thumped his back like he was sending off a soldier. I stood 3 feet away, unacknowledged, feeling the surgical scar across my future burn before it was even cut. On the ride home, silence filled the car. Mom finally broke it. "We're proud of you too, Adrian. For being so resilient." Resilient. Their code word for neglected. I stared out the window, jaw clenched, heart pounding, not just from illness, but from the quiet rage that had begun to harden into resolve. If they thought I was strong enough to endure, I would endure. But not for them. I would endure for myself. The months after Imran left were the hardest stretch of my life. My condition didn't pause just because the family decided I could wait. Episodes hit me without warning. A sharp pressure in my chest during exams, dizziness so strong I had to grip the edges of my desk until the room stopped spinning. I learned to carry aspirin in my pocket, like a secret talisman, something to buy me time. Doctor visits became sparse. Without funds, every appointment was framed as unnecessary expense. My parents leaned on excuses: hospitals just want your money, or Western medicine exaggerates. The truth was simpler: they couldn't afford it after pouring everything into Imran's tuition abroad. So, I started compensating. At the library, I pulled down anatomy textbooks no one else touched. Thick volumes with worn bindings and diagrams of hearts sliced open. I traced the chambers, valves, arteries with my fingertip, memorizing what each one did. At night, when the panic rose in my chest, I studied case reports on public medical forums, comparing symptoms to mine. I wasn't pretending to be a doctor. I was clawing for survival. One afternoon, during a particularly bad episode, I collapsed onto my bed and whispered through clenched teeth, "If they won't save me, I have to know enough to save myself." That became my creed. I started small. Learned to monitor my pulse accurately, to log episodes with timestamps and triggers. I charted everything: diet, sleep, stress. It gave me a sense of control, like I was building a map through the chaos. My parents saw none of this. To them, I was just quiet, studious Adrian, the one who didn't need much. They mistook silence for stability. Meanwhile, Imran sent photos from abroad, him smiling in front of ivy-covered walls, him holding textbooks I recognized as costing more than my entire monthly medication. My parents pinned his pictures on the fridge like holy icons, while I swallowed aspirin alone. But pain has a way of sharpening resolve. Every skipped doctor visit, every ignored symptom drove me deeper into study. I wasn't just learning for interest, I was learning out of necessity. I read until the diagrams blurred, until my eyes ached, until I could recite the flow of blood through the heart like scripture. And slowly, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer owned me. I was still sick. Still abandoned. But I was no longer helpless. Imran's life overseas became the centerpiece of our home. Every week, new photos arrived, him in crisp suits at networking events, him laughing with classmates outside stone lecture halls, him holding coffee cups with names of European cities scrawled on them. My parents printed them out, taped them to the fridge, framed them on the mantelpiece. Every visitor to our house was ushered to the display. "Our Imran is studying abroad," Dad would beam, chest puffed. "A future leader. He's making us proud." Mom would add, "It was a sacrifice, but worth every cent." No one asked what that sacrifice cost me. While my chest clenched during sleepless nights, Imran posted selfies at rooftop bars. While I rationed expired pills a neighbor slipped me from her old prescriptions, he sent home receipts for designer jackets. My parents wired him money they didn't have, borrowed from relatives, begged from friends. They insisted he couldn't live like an ordinary student. He was their golden son, his image untouchable. I became the shadow. When guests visited, they'd ask me, "How's your brother doing abroad?" Not once did anyone ask how I was. It was as though my collapse in the gym had never happened, as though my chest wasn't a time bomb ticking under my ribs. But shadows see things light cannot. From my quiet corner, I noticed details no one else did. In Imran's photos, the smiles didn't always reach his eyes. The receipts grew longer, more extravagant, as if he were proving something. And the phone calls, he rarely spoke to me, but when he did to our parents, I heard the edge in his voice: demands, complaints, entitlement. They never noticed. To them, his brilliance blinded all flaws. Meanwhile, I pushed further into self-study. Medical journals, anatomy atlases, even volunteer shifts at the local clinic where I fetched files and quietly observed. Every heartbeat I recorded in my notebook felt like defiance. Every chart I memorized felt like armor. Imran had the money, the spotlight, the applause. But I was building something quieter, something he couldn't post on social media. Knowledge. Resilience. A foundation they couldn't steal from me. And though I didn't know it yet, the day would come when all of their sacrifices for him would collapse. And the one they had abandoned, the sun in the shadows, would be the only one left standing with the power to save. It started as survival. Studying anatomy was a way to quiet the fear, to feel like I had some grip on the storm inside my chest. But survival sharpened into something else: obsession. I haunted the library, pulling every medical textbook I could find. I learned the language: systole, diastole, atrioventricular, mitral. I filled cheap spiral notebooks with sketches of hearts, tracing blood flow until I could recite it backward. I memorized symptoms, side effects, complications. Every word was a weapon, every diagram a shield. At the clinic where I volunteered, I asked to shadow whenever I could. Most doctors brushed me off, but one, Dr. Alvarez, noticed. He saw me watching how he placed his stethoscope, how he read an EKG printout. One day, he handed me an old anatomy atlas from his student years. "If you're going to look over my shoulder, you might as well understand what you're seeing." That book became my Bible. Its pages smelled of ink and dust, its spine cracked, but it carried knowledge I devoured like oxygen. At night, I studied by lamplight while the house slept. My parents thought I was just distracting myself with books. They never realized I was dissecting betrayal into bone and sinew, turning their abandonment into the very thing that would define me. Meanwhile, Imran's messages from abroad grew bolder. "I need another transfer. Rent is higher than expected. Everyone else is buying laptops, I can't look poor." Each demand was framed as necessity, and each time, my parents found a way. They borrowed from relatives, cut corners at home. Once, Mom even pawned her wedding bangles. When I asked about it, she snapped, "Don't you understand? This is for the family's future." I bit my tongue, but inside, the word seared: whose future? Certainly not mine. The irony twisted in me. They had drained my hospital savings to fund him, and now, in chasing after his brilliance, they were creating a doctor without even realizing it. Not the one they wanted. Not the one they chose. The one they forced into existence by neglect. Every late-night study session, every observation at the clinic, every scribbled note was fueled by the same truth: I had been cut open, not by a scalpel, but by betrayal. And I was going to stitch myself back together. Not just as a survivor, but as someone who could hold life in his hands, his own, and one day, theirs. The night I mailed my med school application, I sat at my kitchen table with a single lamp, the rest of the house swallowed by sleep. It was August 3rd, the envelope's corner still bears the postmark, and I remember the way the paper crinkled under my fingers as if it, too, could feel the weight of the moment. Inside were photocopies, my community college transcripts, a 2-page personal statement I'd rewritten until every sentence felt like bone, and a single letter from Dr. Alvarez recommending me, handwritten, sure, but fierce. He'd scrawled, "This young man doesn't do things halfway. Give him a chance." I folded that note twice and tucked it under the packet like a talisman. Getting to that mailbox had been its own operation. I worked nights at a diner to pay for printing fees and for the single prepaid postage I could afford. I tracked every dollar in an old spreadsheet, line items with dates: July 5th, bus fare to community college $2.20, July 17th, photocopies and binding $6.40, July 28th, application fee waiver submitted. Small, precise acts that knitted together into something larger. My parents noticed none of it. When I said I had to work extra shifts, Mom smiled and told me I should be resting. "Don't stress about the future," she said. "You'll be fine." Fine again, that dull word they used like an excuse. I studied for the entrance exam between shifts and clinic volunteer hours. There were flashcards jammed into every pocket, a battered paperback of physiology with pages folded at key chapters, and an old digital recorder where I narrated cardiovascular pathways while stirring soup at 2 a.m. The first time I ran an ECG in the clinic, my hands trembled so badly I thought I'd drop the leads. Dr. Alvarez didn't flinch. He held my wrist the way mentors hold the hands of trainees: steady, corrective. "Slow the motion," he said. "Let the reading come to you." I learned to trust rhythm, to read the quiet between beats. Applications came back in trickles. Rejection letters were typed and impersonal. One arrived on September 12th in a thin white envelope: "We regret to inform you." And I slid it into a drawer and didn't open it for 3 days. Then, on October 29th, the acceptance packet arrived from the fictional Street Benedict Medical College, thick, official, wax seal impression stamped in the upper right corner of the certificate inside. I remember the exact layout: an enclosed financial aid package offering a partial scholarship, a breakdown of tuition and living costs, and a worksheet estimating what loans I would need. They had awarded me a merit scholarship of $9,200 for the academic year, enough to make a life possible if I stretched every line item. When I told my parents, they clapped distractedly as if reading the words off a page they hadn't really looked at. "That's wonderful, Adrian," Dad said, flipping through the packet without comprehension. "But remember, medical school is expensive. You'll need to be practical." Practical. They meant sacrifice for him, always him. I kept the scholarship letter on my bookshelf like a small flag. Behind the academic celebration, there was a negotiation to be had with reality. I balanced tuition deadlines against my meager savings and the occasional customer who tipped well at the diner. I deferred, petitioned for a spread payment plan, and negotiated student loans like a streetwise accountant. Street Benedict's program was brutal from day one. The anatomy lab smelled of formalin and cold steel. The first time I held a scalpel in a supervised lab, it felt like picking up a language that had always been inside me but never spoken aloud. I kept a logbook, dates, times, procedures watched, notes on mentors. August 14th, first cadaver persection observed, 9 o'clock to 12:30, Dr. Evers demonstrated thoracic dissection. September 2nd, assisted with arterial line insertion in simulation lab, 1400 hours to 15:30, supervisor noted steadiness under pressure. Those logs weren't for anyone but me, they were proof I could point to when the doubts tried to worm their way in. There were nights I thought I would not make it. During a clinical skills exam my hands shook so badly that the proctor asked if I'd slept. 3 hours, I lied. My pulse would climb fast, old habits, but I learned to breathe into account, to ground myself by reciting the flow of blood through the heart in my head. The tests came back, I scored in the 88th percentile on the clinical reasoning section, and my practical scores were high enough that one attending wrote in the margin of my evaluation, "Excellent clinical intuition for someone with limited prior exposure." I kept that note folded in my wallet. When match letters came years later, there was no fanfare in our house. The packet from the residency program, Metropolitan General's cardiology track, arrived the same way all formal things arrive, stamped, bureaucratic, final. They glanced at the envelope, saw the name, nodded, and then turned back to a television program about Imran's latest achievements. I processed the paperwork alone, sending forms to the hospital's graduate medical education office, booking travel for orientation, photocopying immunization records, and printing my residency contract. The contract itself was a document of tiny tyrannies, duty hours, on-call obligations, licensure timelines, but it was also a legal recognition of something I had become. Through it all, my parents' commentary never shifted beyond the familiar pattern: proud proclamations for Imran and paternalizing platitudes for me. "We're proud of you both," they'd say like a ritual. The subtext was consistent: his future was an investment, my future was a curiosity. That constancy, more than anything, fueled the work. I wanted to make their refusal to help look stupid, not vindictive, but incontrovertibly foolish. I wanted the record to show that the son they left to fend for his life had, through method and medicine and a lot of lonely nights, become the person who could save it. The day I hung my first white coat in the locker room at Metropolitan General, the fabric felt heavier than anyone else's. It bore the scent of disinfectant, coffee, and late nights. On the inner pocket I kept 3 things: Dr. Alvarez's note, the photocopy of the hospital savings account statement that proved how it had been emptied, a small thing I'd kept from the day I discovered it, and a slim envelope containing the stamped, dated acceptance to Street Benedict. Those artifacts were small and banal, but they mattered. They were my chain of custody for a life reclaimed. I didn't parade them. I never raised them at the table. I did my work, quietly, with a discipline that was surgical in itself. Every rotation, every note in the patient chart, every consult request filed, those were the stitches I sewed into the rupture my family had made. The betrayal had been the incision, the years of study and care were the sutures. When the first time came that I stood over an operating table with a real patient under anesthesia, a fragile 62-year-old man with a blockage in his left anterior descending artery, I felt a familiar hum in my chest, the old panic. Hands steady, I traced the steps I'd rehearsed 10,000 times in my mind. I didn't think about punishment or payoff. I thought about rhythm and technique, about clamps and counts and cold saline rinses. The lamp over the table hummed, the monitors sang their steady beeps, and somewhere in the sterile corridor my parents would have argued about money, or about Imran's next flight. My focus narrowed to the beat under my gloved fingers, the small, absolute fact of being entrusted with a life. That operation turned out well. The patient's post-op notes were a small triumph: stable vitals, good perfusion, transfer to step down within 24 hours. My attending signed the chart, performed well under pressure. I wrote in my log, March 6, 9:15 to 11:40, LAD stent placement assistance, first lead in procedural suite, debrief, technical approach, 11:45. It's an antiseptic line in a notebook, but it felt like proof that the long, quiet accumulation of knowledge had become competence. Cutting deep didn't mean revenge in the literal sense. It meant making an incision where the hurt had been and, with precision and care, replacing what was missing. They had taken a fund I needed to live. I had taken the harder route, education, grit, a decade of small, exacting choices, and turned it into something indisputably mine. When the time came that someone in my family needed me to stitch things back together, when they would come to me not with applause but in real, terrified need, I wanted to be ready. Not to gloat. Not to punish. To do the only thing worth doing with power, to heal. The first time I slipped my arms into a white coat, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility, heavy and stiff on my shoulders, smelling faintly of starch and new fabric. I was 24, standing in a lecture hall at St. Benedict Medical College, surrounded by classmates whose families had paid their way without blinking. Their parents clapped and snapped photos. My parents didn't come. They were busy wiring money overseas for Imran's new internship. The ceremony was short. A dean spoke about the trust of the public, about humility in the face of suffering. But when my name was called and the coat settled across my shoulders, I felt something deeper than ceremony. This wasn't a gift. It wasn't family pride. It was proof that I had dragged myself here against every obstacle. Clinical rotations began soon after. Long days, longer nights. I learned the routines of the wards, how to present a case in 60 seconds, how to write progress notes crisp enough that an attending wouldn't tear them apart, how to steady my hand when drawing blood at 3 a.m. under fluorescent lights. The sound of monitors became my background music, the smell of disinfectant my constant companion. My first patient was a boy just a year younger than I'd been when I collapsed in that gym. He had arrhythmias, the kind that left him pale and trembling in bed. His parents hovered, wringing their hands, desperate for updates. I remembered being that boy, except there had been no hovering, no desperate concern for me. I stood at his bedside longer than required, explaining in careful detail what the doctors were doing, what the numbers on the screen meant. His parents gripped my hand in gratitude. For a moment, I saw my own parents in their faces, but theirs reflected a care mine had never shown. That contrast hardened something inside me. My family had told me I could endure. Now I was the one holding charts, explaining survival, translating fear into knowledge. The coat became more than fabric. It was armor. It gave me authority in rooms where once I'd been invisible. Nurses asked my opinion. Patients' families looked to me for answers. Even attendings, after initial skepticism, began to nod at my questions instead of brushing them off. At night, when exhaustion pressed down, I'd hang the coat on the back of my dorm chair and stare at it. I thought about the day my parents emptied my hospital savings, how they decided I wasn't worth the cost. That betrayal had brought me here. Their neglect had forged this symbol. And I promised myself, if the day ever came when they stood before me as patients, begging for the care they once denied me, I would not be cruel. But I would not let them forget either, because the white coat didn't erase the past. It carried it, stitched into every seam. Imran came home at 26 with 2 suitcases, a hollow stare, and no degree. For years, my parents had boasted of his bright future abroad, but the truth unfolded fast: missed lectures, unpaid tuition, loans he never managed, and an expulsion buried under excuses. The golden sun was tarnished, and the house that once rang with praise now carried the weight of his failure. He moved back into his old room like nothing had changed. My parents tried to spin it, he just needed a break, a chance to reset, but the whispers in the neighborhood told the truth. Everyone knew they had sacrificed everything for him. Everyone knew it had collapsed. Meanwhile, I was a resident physician at Metropolitan General. My days blurred into 12-hour shifts, pre-rounds at 6 a.m., consults in cardiology, notes scrawled in digital charts, and long nights in the call room with pagers buzzing like angry insects. I lived on black coffee and adrenaline, but every exhausted morning when I buttoned up my white coat, I carried a quiet pride. At family dinners, the contrast was impossible to miss. Imran sat slouched, scrolling on his phone, still demanding. I need money for a business course. I can't just sit here. My parents nodded, scraping together funds they didn't have, pretending he was still their ticket out of obscurity. And me? They barely asked about my residency. When I did mention a case, they brushed it off with distracted nods. That's nice, Adrian. Then they'd turn back to Imran's endless schemes. But I no longer needed their validation. The hospital halls were my stage, the patient charts my ledger. Every successful procedure, every calm explanation to a terrified family, every moment I held a life steady, that was my proof. Still, there was a bitter irony. Years ago, they drained my hospital fund to give him a future. Now he was back, broke and directionless. And I, the one they said could endure, was the doctor, the one person in the family who had actually built a future. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The silence at that dinner table said it all. Imran had returned, but so had the reckoning. Because soon, his body would betray him the way mine once betrayed me. And when it did, the only person standing between him and the abyss would be the brother they left behind. The irony came full circle one winter morning. I had been on call for 30 hours straight, moving between patients in the cardiology wing, when the old familiar pressure gripped my chest. It was sharp, sudden, the same fire that had dropped me on the gym floor 12 years before. Except this time, I wasn't a helpless 17-year-old waiting for someone else to explain what was happening. I knew every signal my body was sending. I had read this script 1,000 times, in textbooks, in patients, in my own reflection. I excused myself, ducked into an empty treatment room, and closed the door. My hands didn't shake as I hooked myself up to the portable ECG. The screen blinked back arrhythmia, irregular spikes I could trace with my own finger. Alone, under the cold fluorescent lights, I became my own first patient. I adjusted my breathing, logged the readings, calculated dosages from memory. I knew exactly what I needed, a beta blocker, timed carefully, monitored closely. I paged a trusted colleague, not as a panicked victim but as a physician presenting a case. "This is me," I said calmly, showing him the printout. "This is my rhythm. Here's my plan." He stared, then nodded slowly. "You've already done the work." It wasn't arrogance. It was fact. The boy who had once been denied care had become the man capable of delivering it, even to himself. The treatment stabilized me. By dawn, the rhythm evened out, the fire in my chest softened to a dull ember. I walked out of that room not just relieved, but changed. I had proven something I had carried with me for years. I wasn't just a survivor of betrayal. I had remade myself into the kind of doctor I once begged for. When I left the hospital that morning, the cold air bit my face, but it felt cleansing. I passed a bus stop plastered with an old advertisement for a medical program, the kind Imran used to mock as boring. I thought of him, asleep at home, still waiting for the world to bend around him. I didn't feel envy anymore. I didn't even feel rage. I felt certainty. Because now I knew, if my family ever needed a doctor, if my brother ever collapsed the way I had once collapsed, there was only one person who could save him. And it was the very one they had left behind. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when the house smelled of lentils and fried onions. Imran had been home for months by then, drifting through schemes that went nowhere, his arrogance worn thin but not gone. He still carried himself like the favored son, even when there was nothing left to favor. I was reviewing case notes at the dining table when I heard the sound, a heavy thud, followed by my mother's scream. I ran to the living room. Imran was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Adrian. Do something." Mom's voice cracked, raw with panic. Dad fumbled with his phone, trying to dial an ambulance, but his hands shook too hard. I was already moving. Training overrode everything. I dropped to my knees beside Imran, checked his pulse, weak, irregular. His breaths came shallow, ragged. The scene was a mirror of my own collapse years ago, except this time I wasn't the boy on the ground. I was the one in control. "Get me a cushion, prop his head," I ordered. My voice was firm, clinical. "And clear the space. Now." They obeyed instantly, panic stripped them of pride. For the first time, they didn't see me as the quiet shadow. They saw me as the only person who could save him. I ran the checklist in my head: airway clear, rhythm unstable, possible arrhythmia. I barked instructions, grabbed the blood pressure cuff I kept in my bag, and began stabilizing him. When the ambulance crew finally arrived, they found Imran already prepped, vitals recorded, initial treatment underway. One of the paramedics glanced at me. "You a doctor?" "Yes," I said simply, stripping off my gloves. "I'm his doctor, for now." The ride to the hospital was a blur of beeping monitors and shouted updates. My parents clung to each other in the waiting room, pale and shaken. I stood apart, coat buttoned, clipboard in hand. Hours later, when the attending confirmed what I already suspected, a heart condition dangerously close to the one I'd once been denied treatment for, my parents collapsed into sobs. They turned to me, desperate. "Adrian, please, you have to take care of him. You're his brother." "Brother?" The word echoed like an accusation and a demand all at once. I looked at Imran through the glass panel, wires taped to his chest, his body fragile in a way he'd never admitted. And I realized the truth: they had gambled everything on him, and in the end, the only reason he was still alive was because of me, the son they abandoned, the one they thought could endure without care. The roles had reversed completely. And the message was undeniable: the future they bet against had become the only one that mattered. Imran spent a week in the cardiac ward. I visited daily, not as a brother, but as a physician. I reviewed his charts, adjusted medications with the attending's approval, checked his rhythms when the night nurses were stretched thin. My notes were neat, clinical, detached. My parents hovered at his bedside, clinging to every word I spoke. It was almost absurd. Years ago they'd dismissed my symptoms, told me I was strong enough to endure. Now they treated every syllable from me as gospel. On the third night, Mom caught my arm in the hallway. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking. "Adrian. If you hadn't been here, we could have lost him." I didn't answer right away. I looked through the glass panel at Imran, asleep under the monitor's green glow. Finally, I said, calm and even, "That's exactly what almost happened to me. The difference is, no one was there for me then." Her face crumpled. She tried to speak, but no words came. Dad avoided my eyes, but I caught the way his shoulders sagged, the weight of shame pressing down at last. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream or spit the truth at them. I let the silence do the work. They already knew the ledger. They knew they'd gambled my life for his dreams, and in the end, only I had the skill to keep him breathing. When Imran was discharged, I walked them to the car. My father muttered, "Thank you, son." The words tasted strange on his tongue, brittle with humility. I nodded once. Nothing more. That night, back at my apartment, I hung my white coat over the chair and sat in silence. The city hummed outside, car horns and sirens, but inside it was quiet. I thought of the boy I once was, the one clutching his chest in a high school gym, terrified, waiting for help that never came. Now, I was the help. The betrayal had cut me open. But the cut had become my incision line, and I had stitched myself back together into something stronger. Not for their approval. Not even for revenge. Simply because I refused to die the way they expected me to. I turned off the light, brushed my fingers across the coat one last time, and whispered to the dark. This time, I saved myself.